You have a guy like Noah Vonleh. He's on the very outskirts of the rotation. He's a luxury pickup. You're not relying on him for a lot of minutes. He's not a Horford. He's not a Grant Williams. He's not firmly entrenched in the rotation. So they can look at that contract and they can look at their salary situation. For them specifically, I mean, they were right up over the luxury tax line. And the Celtics made the decision to waive Vonleh in advance of the guaranteed date. And I believe what I read is it will save them about $7 million in salary and tax. Because we got to remember, once you're over the tax line, you're penalized once you go a certain amount over the tax. So you can't just look at the face value of the contract and say, oh, they saved 1.5 million or something. For tax teams, there's an additional penalty that you incur. So for them, it's a lot more than that. So if you're just over the tax, if you're not looking to pay that number, or you just want to reduce your tax bill, it makes a lot of sense for teams like the Celtics to make a move like that. And I'm not sure if I said that they waived him or whatever. They actually traded him to the Spurs.
Right.
I wanted to clarify that. So they traded him to the Spurs, and the Spurs sent them back a very heavily protected second round pick.
Max protection that you could get. Yeah.
Right. So they're probably not even going to see the pick. It's just like, we have to send something back. It's part of the rules. You can't trade a player for nothing. So they said, we'll give you a pick, but they're probably not going to see the pick. So interesting how the Celtics leveraged that play into saving a little bit of cash.
Yeah, yeah. And what's interesting is, we're talking about the cut down day. So the cut down day is January 10th, but you have to clear waivers by January 10th, and it takes 48 hours to clear waivers. That's why January 7th is the real cut down day. Yep. Eric Pincus will say that all the time. If anyone knows Eric Pincus, Sports Business Classroom. But so what happens here is why it's interesting is the trade, and everyone's asking why does it matter if there's a waiver deadline then for the guaranteed contract? Well, what happens is, number one is the Celtics don't want to waive him, because if they waive him, they're going to get taxed on the salary that's accrued up to the point that they waived him. That's already accrued and paid. So they're going to get taxed on that. When they trade him, they assign the entire contract to the Spurs. So the entire salary goes with that. So they're not getting taxed on any of that. And just another note on luxury tax and when you determine the tax bill, it's on the last day of the regular season, and then there's some minor adjustments. But that's when the snapshot is taken. So no matter how high or low you're going right now, but between all these trades that are going to be made, it doesn't matter until that last day of the regular season. That's why they're able to do this. But the point why the waiver deadline matters right now is because they're able to trade him to the Spurs right now, and then the Spurs are able to waive him.
Yes.
And then they don't have to pay the remainder of the contract. That's the important part of the trade deadline. So a couple interesting other facets and why, this is such a small deal, saving them $7 million. But it's interesting for us to talk about because there's so many different rules that are kind of thrown into this on the salary cap. And that's, kind of what we talk about all the time. So Vonleh had a 1-year, $2.4 million deal, but it's a vet minimum deal. So while he gets paid $2.4 million, the Celtics were only on the hook for 1.8 under the vet minimum rules. So that's what they're going to be taxed on before they ship them out. The tax rate, it increases no matter as you go further and further over the tax threshold. You get the rate increases over time. So the math gets more and more complicated as you keep going on. It's not just one set tax rate. So that 1.8 million gets lessened on their team salary, and they save that roughly $7 million in their luxury tax bill. And just to be clear, it's just a bill that the ownership pays as far as the revenue sharing. It's not giving them any salary cap relief, so they're still operating over the salary cap when they're doing any roster moves, any transactions. They still have to deal in the exceptions. The only thing that it's going to help them with is if they do add on another player later, if they look to build, it's going to help ownership, convince ownership, hey, you saved $7 million here. It might help them, swallow that pill of paying even bigger luxury bill if they're bringing on a bigger and better player down the road.
Exactly.
And just a couple other quick notes for this is the reason why the Spurs did it here is because, one, the Celtics also sent $1.5 million in cash to the Spurs as incentive. Which is nice for them. Obviously, it's a nice check. And then they're able to cut Vonleh and what was accruing, they're able to put on their minimum salary cap because they haven't even hit their floor for the salary cap yet. You have to hit 90%. So
Right.
they're able to at least add that on and then take that $1.5 million in cash, which doesn't affect anyone's salary cap rules. It's just cash between owners
Yep.
at that point. So that's why they did it. And that's what their incentive was to do it. So it's really tricky and interesting how they're able to, these teams are able to save $7 million, send up $1.5 million, help each other with cap relief in a very small deal like this.
Yeah, most people will look at this deal if you're not trained on the intricacies of the CBA. You'll look at the deal and say, Vonleh went to the Spurs and they waived him. And you say, okay, well, that was easy. And you move on. But if
Right.
you really kind of dive into it and you bring up all those really good points about why each team did it, it makes more sense. Because even for the Spurs, it makes a lot of sense to do this because they get the extra cash and, they can make that deal and they still don't have to, incur. They can still waive him prior to the guarantee date. So it's not like they're on the hook for everything if they make this
Right.
deal. So, for both teams, it makes a lot of sense. And I'm glad you brought up the salary floor because it's such a rare scenario that a team even flirts with the floor just because
Right.
most teams are over the cap. Not to mention, most times teams aren't even at the floor because they're so far over, they're in the cap or the tax. But you bring up the situation to where they're at the floor and like there's incentive to get above the floor because if you don't hit that minimum, that shortfall, that amount to between where you are and where that floor is, I believe that's distributed to the players. They
It
get that
is, yeah.
extra money.
Right.
So I'm sure the ownership is like, we might as well spend it on somebody, right? We might as well do something with the money, or otherwise the players that are already on the roster are given this money. So it creates an incentive for these teams to go out there and at least hit 90%, which I'm sure they will. I mean, there's no reason for them not to hit 90%. I mean, that's still, it's a reasonable amount of money. It's not anything extravagant. They're not over the cap. So it's more than likely they'll end up over that floor for sure. And then when it comes to Vonleh's veteran minimum deal that you spoke of, that also operates on a scale. It's based on years of experience. So if you're a vet and you get a minimum deal and let's say you've played 2 years in the league, that amount is going to differ from somebody like Vonleh, who has several more years. I think he has 7 years already of experience in the league. So his minimum is different from somebody that has less experience. So just something else we wanted to point out because they're not all created equal. Some people may see vet minimum and they're like, okay, that's a set amount. It's different from the mid-level exception or the biannual or the room exception to where those are fixed numbers. Every team pays that same amount of money to their players if they want to use that exception. For the vet minimum, though, it's different because it's going to depend on how many years of experience they have. So if someone has 9, 10, it's a lot more expensive, relatively speaking, than somebody that has 1, 2, or 3 years of experience. So just something to keep in mind when you're looking at veteran minimum. They're not all created equal.
Right. And if people are looking at the No Trade Clause website and looking at the cap sheets, they're going to see all the same number. It's at 1.8 million and change for all these vet minimum deals. That's what the cap hit is for the team because it's only up to the second year, which right now is that 1.8 million. But that doesn't mean all those players are getting paid 1.8 million. Vonleh is getting paid the 2.4. Someone who's a 10-year vet is getting paid more, and someone who's a 3-year vet is getting paid less. That's only specifically with regard to the cap hit. What they're actually getting paid, the team is paying the 1.8, and then the league out of a fund is paying the remainder of it.